first in a series of civil cafes that we're going to do that are going to focus solely on education. We plan to hold them around Oahu, and the next one takes place on Wednesday, October 8th at the beach, public and school library at 6 o'clock. We're going to hold 2 more early next year, and then we hope to visit the neighbor islands with these as well. So stay tuned to Civil Beat for more information. While I'm plugging Civil Beat, subscriptions are only $10 outside. But I really want to let you know about our new Facebook community. We started a Facebook group where we're hoping that we can have really honest discussions about education issues. So we wanted to set up a place where you can discuss challenges that face your schools in your areas and offer your thoughts and solutions and pose questions to other members of the community. So I hope when you get home or right now on your cell phones that you'll do a search on in Facebook Civil Beat Education Community, and join that group, and please become part of the dialogue. That said, I want to quickly introduce our sponsors for the night. Don Young from the University of Hawaii College of Education, gratefully is supporting this event, and Sherry Nakamura of the He'e Coalition, she's the director. Sherry's been involved in a variety of education issues here in Hawaii, and I know from my own conversations with her that she's a singer and actress who's been in on and off Broadway plays. So please come out and say something, let people know about it.
Good evening, everyone, and aloha. Welcome to the Civil Beat Education Series. He'e Coalition is proud to be a sponsor of this event. For those of you who don't know what He'e Coalition is, we're a group of community organizations and parent groups dedicated to improve public education through family and community engagement. We have a table outside, so if you'd like to get more information, please come outside after the event and we'd be happy to talk to you more about it. Thank you for coming tonight, and thank you Civil Beat for coming up with the idea of having this intimate conversation about education. It's very much aligned with our coalition and our mission to bring the community closer, parents and community closer to education issues here in Hawaii. So please enjoy the evening, and we encourage you to participate by asking questions and giving comments. So thank you. I'm going to pass it over to John Young right now. John. Yeah.
I'm probably going to echo a lot of what Sherry just said, but on behalf of the students, the faculty, and staff of the College of Education at University of Hawaii Manoa, welcome. We're really, really pleased to co-sponsor this event along with He'e and Civil Beat on this very, very important education series. One of the interesting things when I go and talk about the College of Education in the community is I could usually start with the College of Education is more than anybody knows. And I include our own faculty and staff in that. So I'm going to take a moment just to plug that we are responsible for preparing tomorrow's teachers, educational leaders, and researchers. We have a responsibility unlike any other college at UH Manoa because our responsibility goes from preschool all the way to graduate school. We deal with public, private, and charter school teachers in terms of preparation, in terms of educational leadership. So this particular forum is right up our alley in terms of being keenly interested in all of this. You may not know that we have in the college about 350 employees, 2,000 students, 8 academic departments, and 2 research units. And we offer over 25 degrees at the undergraduate and graduate level. So that's the advertisement for the college. So thank you all for coming, and now let's get on with the program. So Aliyah, I'll turn this over to you.
Hello everyone, I'm Aliyah Wong. I'm the education reporter at Civil Beat. I've been there for about almost 3 years now, so I've been there for a while. And we're here today to discuss school choice and really sort of the differences between public schools, private schools, and charter schools. And as Marguerite pointed out in a conversation we had earlier this week or was last week, charter schools are public schools, but they are different in a lot of ways. So I'm hoping we can sort of discuss those differences and what can be done to maybe reconcile the differences in the state. There's this funny thing about Hawaii, and I grew up here, so I never really noticed it until some reporters in the newsroom brought it up. But a lot of people, you know, when they start a conversation here, they'll ask, what school did you go to? And they don't mean what college did you go to. They mean what high school did you go to, or even what elementary school did you go to. And I'm hoping we can sort of answer why that is, because of course, you know, it's a cultural thing, it's also a sociological thing, it's probably also a little bit of a way to sort of define what a person is, where they came from, and how they're different or similar to you. So to start this conversation off, I'd like to ask each of you, what defines a private school or public school or a charter school? And I'd also like you guys to maybe sort of differentiate the goals of these schools, and what differentiates the goal of a private school versus a public school. So Phil, we'll start with you, and this is Phil of the Hawaii Association of Independent Schools, which represents private schools in the state.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I'm the Director of Programs for the Hawaii Association of Independent Schools, and we represent about 100 schools in the state, and we do the licensing of private schools on behalf of the state, and about 60 of those schools we also accredit on behalf of the Western Accrediting Association. I guess my statement on private schools is that I feel we are very lucky to live in a country like America that gives people choices. Some people don't want a secular government agency educating their kids. Some people want their kids educated in English with Christian values, some in Japanese with Buddhist values, some in Hawaiian with Hawaiian values. Some people don't want their kids educated by anybody, so they homeschool. And luckily, in the United States, we have all those choices. It's not like China or Russia where you don't have the choices. And our 60-some schools that are members of HEIS, licensed and accredited, range from schools as small as 50 students to as large as Punahou with almost 3,000 students. Actually, the full range is almost 5,000 students. So, and they range from very well endowed schools like Kamehameha schools to very tuition-driven schools that are right on the edge. So HEIS itself helps. We have grants from Kamehameha schools that help charter schools become accredited. We run a master's program for Hawaiian-focused charter schools, and we're part of a national effort called Public-Private Schools with a Public Purpose to try to bridge the gap in many cases. So I think the difference primarily between private and public is that the range of options for type of education, whether it's gender specific, religious specific, language specific, that full range exists in our schools. And we try our best to meet the obligations of providing as much choice as possible.
Marguerite, you're with Parents for Public Schools in Hawaii. It's a national organization, right? You're with the Hawaii affiliation of that. And you're also, are you a professor at UH as well?
Yes, I'm a parent of a public school student. That's my first job. But I'm a professor in the biology department. And I'm a member of Parents for Public Schools. Can I just say a little bit about myself? Okay. Yeah, so we started basically at the Furlough Friday crisis. And we fought very hard to end that. And afterwards, we realized that the families and children of Hawaii don't really have a voice. And so we try to fill this void, and I think we do a pretty good job. So we try to think about what families need and how to support schools and how to support families in the schools. So a couple of our campaigns right now are 1,000 Family Voices, where we're asking families across the state to talk about what do they think about education, what are their concerns, what do they love about their school. And hopefully documenting, bringing this out, sharing these things will help to not only inform people, but to connect families within the schools and between the schools. Because that's something that's kind of missing at a lot of public schools, is that families feel very isolated. And oftentimes the schools don't even know how to reach the families. The other thing we're working on is the middle school tours. So there's a lot of attrition from public schools at the transition to middle school. And we thought that, you know, a lot of it is fear, and a lot of it is not really information-based. So what we're trying to do is give people the opportunity to come and visit and see what's going on at the school. Try, you know, and a lot of people, when they come on the tours, are really surprised. The other activity associated with that is the middle school nights, and that's where we talk about the transition and what it means, you know, in a real sense for the child. How does the school change, but also what's going on in the kid at this really funny stage when they're, you know, just starting to go into middle school. So it's a really informative night, and we try to support families that way. So yeah, so it's advocacy, it's family support, and it's a voice. And then I guess in my job at UH, I see my connection there is I teach the children who come from private and public school. So I see, like, you know, a lot of differences in experiences and how that translates into performance in college.
And before we go to Tom, I might interject. You said there's a lot of attrition at the middle school level, and that's when a lot of people do end up going to private schools from public schools. I'm one of those people. I went to private school in 6th or 7th grade after going to public school through 6th grade. Do we have any numbers or data to corroborate that?
I forgot the number, but I think in Honolulu, is it more than 14%? Something like 14. I don't remember the exact numbers, but those numbers are published. They're high. They're shockingly high. I mean, they're way above the national average.
Right. Okay. Well, Tom Hutton, he's the executive director of the Hawaii Charter School Commission, so he oversees the 33 charter schools in the state, or is it 34?
34.
34 now. Okay. Gotta keep track. Right. So tell us about charter schools and what the goals of charter schools are.
Okay, well, thank you very much for everybody for showing up. I was talking to some people beforehand and telling them that I'm not going to proceed from the assumption that anybody really understands what charter schools are. So some of you know very well what they are, and you know, don't doze off too much. But it's always important when you're discussing charter schools to kind of start at the beginning and explain what is this creature. So I mean, Aaliyah already pointed out that they are public schools. In fact, I had a little conversation with Mike when they were organizing this. You know, what if we called it, you know, schools DOE, public and charter, versus distinguishing between public and charter? Because charter schools are public schools, and importantly for parents, two of the important things about that are they're tuition free and they're open enrollment. Now there are some nuances to that maybe we'll discuss later, but basically you can go to a charter school. You don't have to, you know, go through an admission selection process. The difference is that they're independently governed with their own governing board, and they're independently managed. So they're not, you know, governed by the state board of education. They're not run by the superintendent. They have their own governance and management, but they're under contract with the Public Charter School Commission. So that's the sort of nexus to the public accountability and being a public institution, is that they have a contract from the commission to operate a public school in our state. They have a lot of leeway to do things differently. They can have a very specific mission, they can have a focus point, a thematic focus, they can do a different curriculum, a different instructional philosophy. For example, we have a charter elementary school on the Big Island that's a Waldorf school. We have about half of the portfolio of charter schools in our state have a Hawaiian cultural focus. Some of them are even, the primary language of instruction is Hawaiian. And that's not to say that you can't also have differentiated programs and those sorts of things in the DOE schools, but charters are the sort of premises you may be doing something a little different that is the mission for your school. So we mentioned that we have 34 statewide, 12 are on Oahu, 14 in the Big Island, 4 Hawaii, 1 Maui, 1 Molokai. And we have 2 that are sort of mostly online. They come in for some physical time. So they're statewide, the primary campus where they operate here on Oahu. They collectively enroll about 10,000 students, which is something like 6% of our public school population. And I guess just for parents thinking about getting hands around what charter schools are, it's sort of, being aware that they may have a specialized focus. They're typically small compared to DOE or even many independent schools, although not all of them are small, but typically they are. About half of them are K all the way through 12, and then we have some that straddle grade levels, like they might be middle school and high school, or elementary and middle. So that's kind of more akin to what you see in the independent school sector, although we also have some that are elementary. Right? And I guess, the important things, again, that they're public schools, so they don't sort of pick and choose their students. There's some nuances to that we can talk about later, but and I guess one other point on that is we have 2 flavors of charter schools. So one are the startup schools, that's the brand new school that somebody creates. But we also have conversion schools, which used to be department schools. And then there's a process under our law through which a DOE school can choose to go the charter route. It's very complicated, and you need the buy-in from faculty and administration and parents and everything else. But so we have 6 of those schools statewide. And when you look at them from the outside, they appear much closer to what you would think of as a traditional sort of public school than some of the startups. In part, that's because they have the campus that looks like what we think of as a public school. And that's a big challenge in the charter sector, is the facilities and the startups. But one of the important things for parents about a conversion school is, even though they become a charter school, they retain their attendance district. So it's kind of unusual. They're schools of choice, but yet they're the default school for that neighborhood, like another traditional school would be. They retain that when they convert. So that's true of those 6 schools. I think that's enough to start.
Very complicated, so there's a lot to go over. I'm still trying to learn myself. What were you gonna say?
Can I speak for public school? Sorry, I forgot to answer the original question.
You did.
So, I graduated from Mililani High School. So I went to public school, and to me, public schools are people's schools. Everyone who lives in that district can go. And they have to accept everyone. And they can't kick anyone out. And that's really, to me, the critical feature of public schools. So, I think a lot of people share this notion that it's really the strength of our public school system is the bedrock of our democracy, right? Because that's where we serve the whole community.
That's a perfect segue into my next question, and it's probably the $1 million question that we all have. Some of you may know that Hawaii has the highest private school attendance rate in the country. It's about 16% or 15%, I think it wavers a little. So about 15% of the state's school-age children are in private schools, and even more so in urban Honolulu, I think. Last I checked, it was about 38% of the kids in Honolulu, or the kids attending school in Honolulu, are in private schools, and that's just remarkable. Nationally, the percent is about 8%. So we're looking at basically double the attendance rate. And there are lots of reasons for that, and it's probably largely historical, maybe cultural, maybe there's a stigma against public schools here, but I want each of you to sort of try and answer that question as to why we have such an obsession with private schools in the state. The private school person.
Okay, well, first off, if we go way back, there was a pretty extensive Hawaiian public school system And after the United States overthrew the monarchy, they immediately shut down that system and replaced it with largely a missionary-driven private school system. And so part of the reason I think is that we have such a large number of private schools and a high percentage of students attending is historical. The private schools sort of had a jump on the schooling of Hawaiian children until the public school system, the American public school system was set up and started. I think that's part of it. I also think because we have such a very diverse population, we're not as like most of the states, that we have large percentages of Chinese and Japanese and Filipino and Caucasian, and Germans and French and so on, that the interest in ethnic-based or language-based schools was pretty strong in the beginning. And so some of those struck out also with their own education program. And lastly, because certain churches, certain religions were very strong in the beginning and founded their own schools, such as Punahou and Iolani. And in the case of Kamehameha, the Queen herself established a school for Hawaiian children. But those schools had money and they had conscripted faculty from they were ministers and ministers' wives and so on. So I think the private schools had a large start and just sort of stayed ahead of the game. We're still not near as big as the public school system, but I think that's part of the reason that there are so many private schools. It's just traditional and historically based.
Marguerite, what about you?
I don't know, it is a very interesting question, and I wonder, I mean, I don't really know how it started. I mean, I don't know the historical research and all of that, but I remember when I was in 7th grade and really at Wheeler at that point, and you know, all the smart kids were applying to go to Punahou and Iolani, and I kind of wanted to too. I don't really know why I wanted to, but I wanted to do it too. And at that time, my parents said no. So I'm like, okay. So I just kept going to public school. And then later, my father passed away when I was in 6th grade. And it was a devastating time for my family. But by the time I reached high school, I couldn't believe, like my mother reminded me of the story, that the teachers told her, oh, Mrs. Butler, Marguerite is very smart. You should send her to Punahou. And I like, and then I kind of remember this, and I talked to my mom, and partly it was because I really didn't want to cause that kind of financial stress to my mother, but I think the bigger reason for me was I saw the value of actually being around all of my peers and learning how to talk to people, learning how to work without all of these tremendous resources, how to get things done, but really, like, you know, actually understanding and interacting with everybody from every socioeconomic status. I told her, no, Mom, that's okay. I'm going to stay here in Mililani. So I think it's like this notion of like, if I'm a good parent, I should be sending my kids to these private schools. That's where they're going to have this opportunity. And it's sort of insidious, you know? I think another reason that parents feel, and it's also not aided by the fact that a lot of teachers send their kids to private school. That's a big
Public school teachers too.
Yeah, public school teachers send their kids to private school. So that again gives you this feeling that there is a lack of faith and trust in the local school, which is very damaging in my opinion. But the other thing is, I think a minority of people, I think sometimes they face a problem in their school. Their parents, they don't feel like for whatever reason, their child's not being treated right. They can't get satisfaction, they get pissed off and they leave. So I've talked to a lot of parents about this, and then I've learned that oh, you don't necessarily get satisfaction in the private school either. But I do think it's this prejudice against public school that's really driving it. A lot of memories about how schools used to be rough way back in the days when we were kids, that may or may not be true anymore. And I suspect too, in some cases, it might even be racism, you know? Like, you don't want your kids to go to school with those kids, so I'm gonna spend a lot of money to send them someplace else. And I'm sure that that's true across the nation.
Well, if you think about a school like Roosevelt, which back in the day was an English-only school, and so kids couldn't speak Pidgin there, so that was one of the more, accomplished public schools, or that was what it was seen as back in the day. And so you do see those legacies still playing out to this day. In my conversations with a lot of people, and sort of speculating as to why we have such a high private school attendance rate, a lot of people did mention facilities. And Tom, as the executive director of the Charter School Commission, you know a lot about facilities or lack thereof, right? So let's talk a little bit about how school facilities are funded in the state, and specifically how it might be a little unequal when we look at charter schools.
Yeah, I mean, I had that on my, just trying to jot down some thoughts, and these are just personal thoughts of it, and it's not unique to the charter sector. I mean, I think it's extreme in the charter sector. So I alluded to this before, that if you're a conversion school, you keep your DOE constructed campus, and that's the home of your school. If you're a startup school, there isn't an independent sort of funding mechanism for you to do your facility. You're meeting those needs with the same stream of funding that all the schools get. So the money that a conversion school, is for your faculty and your equipment and your staff and all that sort of stuff. In the case of a startup school, also has to be stretched to provide for the facility. That's a real huge challenge for our startup schools. But that said, as much as from the standpoint of a startup charter school that's actually got kids in attend, the DOE schools, the conversion schools look like nirvana. Yeah, you just can't get around this delicately. It's kind of a disgrace to the state that some of our public school infrastructure is. And this is not a secret. We're 50th in the country in terms of investment in facilities here. And it's very challenging. We're not an affluent state, although we have a veneer of glamour and that kind of thing. But we really have neglected our physical infrastructure in our public education system quite considerably here. And that's why, by the way, if you follow the whole discussion about the Public Land Development Corporation and the public-private partnerships, and that kind of got away. It started out as a school thing and then became more broad, and there was this big public backlash. But part of the premise behind that whole discussion was we're never going to catch up with the backlog for the facilities by funding them in the traditional way of appropriations from the legislature. We've got to do something completely different, like they always talked about, is it Jefferson at the end of the aisle? Huge footprint, incredibly valuable land. You could have a school just as big there, and maybe find some corner of that a developer built something private, and in exchange for that, they built the new public school. And it gets into, it's public land, how do you give it to private, all those dilemmas that you deal with from a policy standpoint. But what was driving this, we're never going to get caught up with this in the old way of trying to finance our public infrastructure. And maybe I could just touch on a couple of other things that weren't facilities related. That's sort of a metaphor for, there's equity issues that may drive parental decisions. One thing I think has to be that we have some just truly extraordinary independent schools here. So when we have lots of families that value education highly, so that's going to happen. That may not account for how disproportionate it is here. But there's another thing, when you brought up, a public school teacher themselves saying this. I mean, I think historically, in addition to the things that Phil talked about, in our more recent state history, we went through this social revolution after World War II, where we had a huge amount of our population that for a long time had been second-class citizens and weren't going to be anymore. And part of their frame of reference for what delineated between who was in what class of citizenship was what school you went to. And those were the historical reasons that Phil talked about. But I think for people who had arrived part of I've arrived is now I'm going to send my kid to Peru too. And so people who got where they got in life because of the benefits of their public education, nevertheless, kind of bought into, this is part of the sign of being a success. Just like, Hawaii is not going to be a territory anymore, it's going to be a state because territory is second class. So it's kind of a larger kind of thing that seems to be. And then, another nuts and bolts thing that I think is true particularly on our island is geography. And if it's going to take you an hour and a half to get into town from Mililani, are you going to be able to get back in time to get your kid from school? And so, but the private school is right down here where you work. And we still have in our public education system the idea that you make school siting decisions based on residents. And maybe that we should re-examine that. Maybe where you work is kind of as important, or if not more important, than where you reside in terms of those decisions.
A lot of people don't realize that you can apply for a geographic exemption. So that's one thing that we talk about on our tours, is that you can, you can potentially go to any public school that you want. You just have to fill out that geographic exemption form.
My understanding is that it's becoming more difficult to get those GEs more so, and you have to have a very good justification for that. What are the reasons that the DOE would acknowledge for a geographical exception?
It's basically first come, first serve. It depends. I mean, some schools are more full than other schools, and so if they have no empty seats, then you can't go. But it's done by lottery if you apply on the deadline, before the deadline, and then so sometimes people, if they wait long enough, like sometimes even after school started, their child might get in at that point. But a lot of parents who are in that situation where they work in town, they end up applying to 5 or 6 different GEs because they're not sure where their child will be accepted. The only thing that's tricky about that for parents is they don't realize that if your child is in there on the GE, when it goes to middle school, that GE doesn't follow along with your child. So you have to reapply again for the geographic exemption.
Couldn't it be argued that that's sort of manipulating the system though, and maybe a certain school it's known to be a little higher achieving, say Roosevelt, like I mentioned, or Kaiser, which they have higher achievement scores. Couldn't you say that that's unfair to do that?
I mean, people can go where they want. So I don't know how you would prevent people from going. And I think, personally, I think it's a good idea for parents to figure out where their child will have a really good fit. And because really, your child will excel if they're comfortable and you're comfortable and you can support everything there.
Before I get to the next topic, Tom, with admissions in charter schools, do they have any geographic requirements, or what sort of stipulations do they have for admissions into charter school?
Well, I mean, I started off with the sort of starting premise that they're open enrollment. And there's a caveat about the conversion schools still have their attendance on it. So if you live out of district and you're interested in a conversion charter school, and this is my family story, so we moved to Kaimuki because we wanted our children to go to Waialae Elementary, which is a charter school, and because they have an attendance district, I had a kindergartner, and that's where they let all the new students in, and that end of the island has, generally speaking, a lower school age population, so a lot of those schools, even the DOE schools, accept lots of GEs, and so the charter school, that Waialae is a charter school that does. But after the kindergarten at Waialae, it's very hard for there to be an opening because it's a very popular school, but because it's a conversion school, we moved there and rented a place just for the school purpose. But charter schools, generally speaking, are open enrollment. I will say right now, the commission actually is having every single charter school submit its admission and enrollment policies to the commission for approval because frankly, there are some issues with some of the past practices with charter schools, which I think were well-intentioned. You know, I mentioned that they have unique missions and kind of special focuses of how they do education. And I think in the interest of wanting to be upfront with parents and making sure that they understand all that and that they bought into the uniqueness of that school, there have been some admissions practices that look a lot more like independent schools than public schools. And we're happy to have that conversation with each of the schools to kind of think carefully about that. was just having a conversation with Don before we started. One unique school is University Labs, because they're creating a sort of representative or diverse student population for research purposes. So they're looking at things that, generally speaking, public schools can't look at. We have to sort of navigate how that works. But generally speaking, the premise should be at a charter school that it's open enrollment. And we're having to have this conversation.
I believe we have at least one UH Lab school teacher out there. Shout out to you. And Phil, I know you're a little lonely over there, so let's get back to you. Let's talk about school accountability. Because obviously, it's a hot topic right now. You have things like the Common Core standard, the new assessments that are aligned to those standards, and that sort of affords a certain consistency for the public school system as well as the charter school system. But Phil, how do you really hold private schools accountable? Because each is an independent school that has its own board, it runs its own operation. How do you really hold private schools accountable?
So most parents are the ones that hold the schools accountable. To be licensed in the state, you have to meet certain safety regulations. All of the employees have to be pass the FBI test for criminal history background. So the state does have basic licensing guidelines that apply to all private schools, accredited or not. But in general, each school has a mission statement that says, this is what we believe, and these are the outcomes we expect of our graduates or our students. And if you want to bring your child here, then this is what we will do for you. My daughter went to a public elementary school and then went to Iolani. And I remember on the first day for new parents, Dalla Washington, the head of school, said, if we guarantee that he or she will graduate, we will make sure. So I think most of our schools, they expect the parents to hold them accountable. And some of the schools, it's like a small Christian school that my child will have Christian values and understand the Bible. For schools like Iolani and Kono, it's your child will go to Yale or Harvard or Stanford or something like that. And so the characteristics are different. But for the most part, each school has a mission statement with expected outcomes. And they are basically, by accepting the tuition, guaranteeing that the children in that school will be educated according to their mission.
Or they'll go to UH. We do see a lot of them at UH. Just want to say that.
And nothing's wrong with UH. And I also, I think the fact that parents, like you say, do hold the schools accountable because they're paying money for these schools, so it's not like the schools can get away with much. Can we talk a little bit about median tuition at private schools here in Hawaii?
About the
Median tuition? What does a typical private school cost in Hawaii?
well, there's almost not a typical. I mean, it ranges. I think the lowest tuition charged by our smallest schools is around $6,000.
Kamehameha schools is actually, I think,
well,
the cheapest.
They're heavily endowed, so that's an unusual case, but multi-billion-dollar endowment, which all of our schools wish they had. So I think it ranges from as small as, even small, I mean, Kamehameha's tuition is almost free if you're a Hawaii student. So I should say it's from free to over $20,000 now. And the larger, more prominent schools like Mid-Pac and Iolani and Kono are on the higher end of that. And we have a big range of median schools in there that are charging in the range of $10,000 to $12,000 or $14,000. But we do have this, some of the smaller schools are like $6,000 to $8,000. So it's sort of grouped by type of school. Many of the religious schools have support from their religious organizations, which allows them to charge less.
And it might seem obvious, but what are the schools that are over 20 now?
I think there's 6 now.
It's like Punahou, Mid-Pac, Iolani.
And also, like Essex is a very specific school that has very small classes, and so they charge more because of the type of education they provide.
Marguerite, many people might not know this, but public school teachers actually get paid more than private school teachers typically. Maybe with the exception of places like Punahou, where a lot of teachers have PhD qualifications or very, very high credentials, but in most cases, private school teachers actually get paid less. And what do you think about the fact that public school teachers get paid more, yet they seem a lot more dissatisfied with their job?
Well, I think that they all get paid too little. It's a very difficult job, and they're professionals. And I think that you can make a strong argument that they do not get a professional level salary. So even though that's true, I mean, it's like, how low do you want to go, really? I mean, compared to other states, Hawaii teachers our public school teachers are not paid well, and our cost of living is very high. So, yeah, honestly, I don't know how they survive, and I really don't know how these private school teachers survive on lesser pay. I think, though, that job satisfaction for a teacher, for an educator, I mean, sure, pay really bites you in the, where if you don't get enough, right? I mean, but they don't really, I think, do it for the money. I mean, they do it for the satisfaction, for, the joy, the thrill of helping children develop. So I think a lot of their dissatisfaction really stems from this massive feeling of disenfranchisement from their work, from decision-making, from the flexibility in terms of what they're able to do. From the poor conditions, I mean, from not having air conditioning when it's like 85 degrees in the classroom, or trying to teach children who are hungry and they can't concentrate because they don't have food, things like that really gets under their skin.
And Tom, in your experience, do you feel like charter school teachers experience the same level of dissatisfaction, or do you think maybe they're a little more content with their jobs because they have a little bit more flexibility? It's a little more customized to their interests.
I agree with Mark. I think that teachers are underpaid in our state, especially given the cost of living. Lynn Finnegan, who's the executive director of our charter schools network, so the association of the schools, likes to point out an example, which I think is very telling. And maybe I need to back up and just explain. In the charter schools, one thing that's unique about our charter school system is that they're all unionized, and not only unionized, they're under the same collective bargaining agreements as the DOE schools. Now, the difference is a charter school can negotiate a supplemental agreement with each of the unions and depart from the master agreement that applies to the DOE schools and do things differently than the DOE schools. But one example that Lynn has mentioned, which I think is very compelling, is that of Kawaikona, which is a school on the Waianae Coast, which in their agreement with their teachers, there are things that they are not providing teachers that DOE teachers get on the master. Hard to staff bonuses, certain kinds of things that are in the master agreement, and they're not providing them. They just that they've negotiated a departure from that and saying it's not something. But there's other compensating things that the teachers like in that school, and they have the lowest teacher turnover rate of any school out on the Waianae Coast. And you named that. The reason we have things like hard to staff bonuses is because of the exodus of experienced teachers who have seniority away from places like Waianae, and yet that doesn't happen at that school. And part of it is, these schools again have unique missions, and they're at a smaller scale where maybe people are able to feel like they have more empowerment to be part of those schools and to influence what's happening at that school. And just a commitment to the community and the mission. They're a very community organized school, and that's so. And I'm not saying that's true of every judge, every teacher, but there is, there's something about small scale and empowerment, I think, is a compensation, even if it's not a monetary one.
It's the topic of our next civil cafe, so you got a preview there. So the fact that charter school teachers here are unionized and under the same collective bargaining agreement as DOE public school teachers, you said that's relatively unique compared to the rest of the country?
There are some other places where charter schools are are unionized by law. That's very rare, but there are some jurisdictions. And there are other places where just like any other group of employees, they have the right to organize. And so that there are some charter school sort of chains that, and then Green Dot Schools is one that, their premise is we're going to have unionized faculty in our schools. But I'm not aware of another place where not only are they collectively bargaining, but they're trying to marry a collective bargaining agreement that was negotiated with a 180,000 student system in mind to a school that they have 42 children. And trying to, and then they, it's not the fault of the negotiators. They're trying, it's hard enough to negotiate. You saw how long it took to get this last agreement, right? It's hard enough to do it for the DOE, but for them also to be expected to think about 34 very different, not only from the DOE, but from each other, charter schools while they're negotiating this. That's something that there may have to be a policy conversation in our state about whether that really works, or whether there's other ways of modifying it to a degree that would work better to fit our schools. But it's a pretty unique animal.
It sounds like it's a bad thing, something that should be looked at.
I'm sure you could find people who would say, it's a good thing. Here's one thing it does. We don't have a situation in our state where charter schools are seen as just a strategy for sticking it to the union. And that neutralizes that issue, which is a huge political challenge for the charter movement in some other states, because here it's not. We're creating charter schools so that we can have non-unionized people and stick it to the union. That's great, especially in a very pro-union state like ours. But just operationally, I think even if you talk to faculty in charter schools, they would say, I like being part of the union, but maybe we should just be negotiating out all agreement with HSTA, not having to marry what we're doing to the deal we want.
We have a question from a reader, and any of you can chime in, but which of any school includes a comprehensive civil rights curriculum complementing what is taught with regard to both American history and Hawaii's entrance into the Union? So, it's not an easy question.
I'm entirely incapable of answering that. And part of it is we don't, at the commission level, we don't really get into the weeds too much about.
I think every school has American history and Hawaiian history as part of their curriculum, but I don't, specific civil rights curriculum, I'm not sure I'm aware of anything in any of the independent schools.
Public schools, do they have a civics curriculum at all?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, I should say, my daughter goes to ULS. So, yeah, but it is a public charter school.
UH Lab School.
UH Lab School, yeah. And they're doing American history right now in 8th grade. And they do talk, I don't know the specifics, if it's a specific civil rights curriculum, but they do definitely talk about these issues.
One question I wanted to ask, and it's not directly related to this conversation, but it's a big topic right now. It's this constitutional amendment that will be proposed on this year's ballot. It's very controversial. It's probably the most controversial ballot question this year, and clearly would establish or would enable a system that in which the public schools or the state partners with private preschool providers, and I'm guessing each of you has a position on it, or at least some insight. So let's start with
So HEIS is in favor of that, in part because many of the private preschools have available seats. And I know historically, one of the main arguments against it is the camel's nose under the tent, that once you allow public funds to go to private schools for something, then it'll be easier to ratchet it up and say, well, we've done it over there, why don't we do it for this and this? To some extent, it already exists. So certain students that attend asset school are funded by the state, because only assets can provide that type of education for them. And so the precedent does exist already that public funds are being used to educate students at a private school. But that's a very specific case. The general case of just saying that the state would fund preschool students to attend private preschools at least until such time as the state could provide enough preschool slots of their own. We're in favor of that simply because it expands the educational opportunities of the students in Hawaii, and preschool is so important for getting a launch into all of the schools.
And before I get to Marguerite, you're mentioning that there is already some public funding that does go to private preschool providers, and that's through the state subsidy program, right? Is that what you're referring to? Preschool Open Doors?
I don't think there's any public funding going for preschools.
It's a subsidy in the sense that parents get money, right? Low-income families get money,
Oh, I
subsidy
see.
from the state, and they can use that at their own will, under their own volition to send their kids to a private preschool
Right.
provider.
So, and that doesn't really technically go to the school, it goes to the parent.
Could be
The parent
ideas.
uses it too. Yeah, but I think the amendment that is proposed and up to be on the ballot in November will be whether to allow the state.
Right, it would be more direct, right? And Marguerite, what do you think about?
Yeah, we've discussed it in our board and we can't support it. It's, we're very concerned, in fact, about public monies going directly to private entities. And, you know, we strongly believe in early childhood education. We do believe that that's important for every child. That's a right of every child. But, you know, there's a lot of things that are just troubling about it. You know, for one thing, a lot of preschool programs in schools have been cut, which is just crazy. I mean, you know, we're really concerned that it's important that a child have good early childhood education. The emphasis is on high quality early childhood education. And once you pay money into these private entities, the DOE has no control over ensuring the quality of these programs. So, you know, it just kind of doesn't make sense. Why cut these programs that are already in schools to serve preschool with licensed early childhood educators with good programs and then shift the money? Another thing that's really troubling to us is this shift in kindergarten age. You know, just like that, they made it, you had to be 6 months older. You know, if you were born late in the year, you couldn't go to kindergarten anymore. And this is messed up. Families, like a lot of children are ready to go to kindergarten, you know, even though they were born in July or August, but they can't. So then they have to wait another year before they can go. So there's a lot of troubling things that we're just really not sure that they've been really completely thought through. What we would really like to see is that more of the state's money go to supporting kindergarten and early childhood in the schools. They can also, one more thing is, it's important that it doesn't make sense. Why would you send your kid away or possibly drive your kid across town to go to preschool when they could go to a local community school?
One argument I hear in favor of the CONAM is that it would actually end up costing taxpayers a lot less because the infrastructure is already in place. The teachers are privately employed, so they're not subject to collective bargaining, which can be expensive. What would you say in response to that?
Preschool is a really hard business. I mean, yeah, so there's a lot of concern. It's hard to actually make a profit running a preschool. So the quality issue is a really big issue. How do they ensure that these are high quality curricula with specializing in early childhood? So sure, it might be operationally cheaper to just pay the money to these other places, but in the long run, what's going to be the cost to Hawaii if these kids are not really being taught at a developmentally appropriate way?
And last answer for Tom, what do you think about it?
I will just say, without elaborating, I'll just say that I personally support it, but that's not kind of relevant because that's not the hat I'm wearing at the commission. Maybe I'll just answer by way of saying kind of what the situation is in the charter sector as to pre-K. We have quite a few charter schools that most charter schools have created an associated nonprofit organization. In part, that's because a nonprofit can do things that, one thing I should mention, our charter schools are state agencies in our state. That's another unique thing about Hawaii. In most places, that's not the case. They're a 501c3 with a contract. Here, they're state agencies. There are some things that state agencies can't do that the nonprofit that's associated with them can. One of the things that a lot of the charter schools have is that their nonprofit may be operating a pre-K program. Because of the funding, there's not public funding available for pre-K in the charter schools, with the exception of students with special needs who the system has a legal obligation to serve at an earlier age than kindergarten age, and charter schools too. But for the others, they may have a preschool program in which they're charging parents some tuition because the school can't do it, but the nonprofit can. They may have, some of our Hawaiian-focused schools may have a very close relationship with Leo, who's operating the program, but they're right next door, and so they're kind of working together. When the legislature was discussing the legislation this past session that would to start off funding pre-K programs in the public schools, at one point charter schools were to have been in that mix, and that legislation died at the 11th hour of the session. So right now there's some DOE schools starting with that, and it's not in the charter sector yet delivered through the schools themselves, but that's a topic of conversation among policymakers about maybe, charter kind of, if they're doing it through the nonprofit, then the constitutional amendment helps because it can get to them but they're also public schools, so if the will of the people is that it be in the public sector, there's still an opportunity maybe for the charters to be in the mix out of it.
I think we could go on for hours learning more about charter schools. I do it every day. So on that note, let's transition into the Q&As. So Jean or Mike, you guys.
Set up the mic here.
If anyone from the audience can go ahead and come up to the mic and ask questions, make them hard.
In the meantime, can I just say, I just want to point out though that one of the ways that these other entities can operate a preschool is because they pay them so very low. You think a public school teacher gets paid low, but a preschool teacher, because I was part of a co-op preschool, we paid them more like $10 an hour. It's really, so I don't know. I really don't know how the state is going to regulate the quality.
And what kind of certification do preschool teachers have?
It's
You don't have to have any certification. So it's entirely up to the school.
In the DOE pre-K program, was there an early education certification?
I don't know. They're licensed teachers, so.
Good licensed teacher.
Thanks for a great program so far. I've learned a lot. I have one question for each of the four of you. If you could change just one thing to make Hawaii's public school system better, what would it be?
I knew that was coming. I thought about it. So the one thing I would do with the issues come up like geographic exception, I guess I would give each parent who wanted to send their child to a public school a voucher to attend a public school or a public charter school, and allow them to seek to register at a school of their choice, so that it isn't necessarily within their neighborhood. If they want to go to the neighborhood, that's fine. But if they, and so to some extent, the public schools would then maybe have to market themselves as a great place to send your kid. I think, I've got lots of friends who are teachers in the public schools, and there's a lot of wonderful teachers and a lot of wonderful schools. But there's also a tendency, I think, of what the Chinese call the iron rice bowl. You get paid to do this whether anybody shows up or not, and whether you do a good job or not. And so I think that would make a big change. Vouchering, I don't think the vouchers ought to be used in private schools, but just allow them to be used at any public or charter school.
I would I think I would let the administrators, the principals, have much more flexibility. to do things and to build a school community and allow the communities to, you know, have much more flexibility in how they run their programs and what they're going to do, and to be accountable for those decisions that they make.
I'm a reporter, so I can't really take too much of a position on anything, but I'll say something very self-serving, that maybe better awareness, better reporting, more than one education reporter in the state will then start advertising. Yeah, I think just in greater transparency, I think the DOE definitely needs to be more transparent with its information and not try and control the message as much, because that ends up just you know, serving as a disadvantage to the students, the teachers, and everyone else who's a stakeholder.
I'm going to give a two-part answer. Well, one is sort of because it relates to the hat I wear. I mean, I think in part we have something in place to help our public education system in our chartering process. And one thing I didn't, you know, someone who has an incredible vision for the school that they want to start, and we have a school founder and director right here, Buffy, who started our Seeks, which is one of our charter schools in Kentucky. You know, there's a tool. It's an incredible deal when you think about it. You know, much of, you know, some of our charter schools, they rightfully complain the money's not enough and this kind of thing. But what do you think about it? If you have a vision for the school you think can contribute to the system as a whole, that you think would be wonderful for kids, and it's not for the faint of heart, and so it's not amateur hour, it's a very rigorous process, but you can actually come to the state and say, this is my vision for an incredible school. This is how I'm going to do it, and get millions of dollars of taxpayer money to educate children. Now, there's a lot of accountability, and rightfully so, but that's a powerful tool for the system. And I guess if I'm shifting out to thinking, just as a parent, a consumer of education with the DOE schools, and, I guess I would love it if the DOE schools were visibly scrapping for those middle-class parents who have the exodus into other places. And if they were doing things like, you know what, we're not going to have 3 schools in our state that have the IB program, but every high school. You know, I'm not saying IB is not the silver bullet there, but that's just an example. You know, every parent who has anxiety about what path their child may take educationally knows that at any school that I send my child to, independent, charter, or public, they're going to get a great education that's going to prepare them. And that doesn't just happen by doing it. You have to really communicate that.
All good answers. Next question, come on, angry teacher.
Not easy. First off, thank you so much. Those are great set of responses. I think it kind of covers the wide spectrum of different challenges we face across the education system. I was doing a bit of research in 2012. 13% of families making $75,000 or more in income nationwide send their schools private. What are the Hawaii stats? I would imagine it's probably a lot greater. And then the second part of that question is, how does this impact our communities? The third part, are there projects in place or being proposed to bridge more connection between private, charter, and public students? I don't think by any means private schools are to be demonized, you know, so kids go there. That's part of the problem. No, I'm hoping to hear that there's some kind of bridge so kids from all different sides of that spectrum of socioeconomics are connecting with one another and learning from each other. I guess to add to that, the reason I bring that question up that I find very important, I was a high school teacher at Whitehall High School for 6 years. A lot of the things that I see students struggling coming from a disadvantaged background is they don't learn the small things that are modeled from before pre-K, that families that come from privilege, those kids get modeled. My own life, I went to a private school for college. I never grew up going to a country club. My first year at SMU, Southern Methodist University, I got introduced to Brooks Brothers. Didn't know what that was. But from learning from my friends, I learned a lot. And I see a lot of those things kind of play out in Hawaii. So is there kind of each person a solution? You know, are there things being bridged? Stuff like that.
So the first part of that question was a pretty straightforward answer, right? Was it specifically families with a median income over 75? Or because I know generally about 15% of Hawaii students go to private schools,
Mhm.
but I don't know how that breaks down by income.
Because I would imagine that stat might be a little bit more interesting if we looked at the numbers behind family income, why they're.
Phil, do you know the answer?
I don't know, I mean, 20-some% of the private school, independent school students are on scholarship. So, and so in many cases, low-income students are attending private schools. I don't have the breakdown of, across all of our schools, what the parents' income is. I think most people think it must be a lot if they can afford $20,000 a year, but it's, I don't have the breakdown.
In my experience reporting this, a lot of that information is that, it's private schools, so it's proprietary, they don't release that, especially a school like Punahou, it probably wouldn't be in their favor to release that information, so.
Back to the
That's a good
transparency.
story idea. And the second question was, is there anything, or sort of what is the impact of
Yeah.
that dichotomy on the community here?
Yeah, what do you guys feel that, how does that impact our students and our ability to function as a community? It seems like that kind of creates a huge barrier.
Do you want to answer that?
Well, so several things that came to mind as you were talking. One, I went to graduate school at Washington University in St. Louis, and I worked as a volunteer in a program to help low-income parents help their kids. So there was a program for the kids, but they took the parents in another room. And something as simple as like, you give the kid, a paper plate and some crayons, and you say, make a clock. And of course, my mom had no problem with that. But there were people who didn't know how to make a clock out of a paper plate and a couple of pieces of paper. And so we helped the parents understand how to help their kid do stuff. So you're really right. I mean, there's stuff that if you start school and even at kindergarten, and even less so at first grade, without that preparation, you're at a great disadvantage. A second thing, Marguerite heard it already because we were on a similar panel a couple of months ago, but there's diversity in the independent schools too. And I always like to tell a story about Jack Darwell, who was head of Kamehameha Schools for many years. He and Ron McPhee were at a Rotary Club meeting and they were talking about their schools. And Ron McPhee said, Punahou only takes the best and the brightest of the whitest students. And Jack Darwell said, Rod, that's not true. You'd be a Chinese girls' school if that were true. Punahou needs football players and basketball players, and so they get recruited. The kids from Kabuku get recruited too. There's significant diversity if you go into those schools, and mostly it's due to the scholarship programs that exist. And it is true that they're very selective in those. I mean, they're looking for really bright, disadvantaged kids, you might say. In part, it's because of that contract I mentioned earlier. They said, if we accept your student, we guarantee that they will graduate.
What do you think?
I think it is a very, it's a very difficult thing. I don't see where students interact. I mean, even in our athletic conferences, we have ILH and OIA. I mean, maybe students will go to each other's dances and things. I don't really, other than like the state science fair or something like that. But those things are so limited in terms of how they bring different school communities together. So I see that as a big problem, and I completely understand what you're saying. So at Lab School, it's a wonderful charter school, and they purposefully do try to mix socioeconomically across all different strata. So what I notice is my daughter complains a lot. Mom, Dad, you're always on my case about my grades. My friends' parents, they don't care, so it's not fair. So I think my husband and I have college education, and we tell her, why did you get a C? Okay, if you don't know why, you need to go talk to the teacher, and you need to do that tomorrow, And I don't And so we're trying to teach her the skills that she needs in order to succeed in life. And I don't think that all families do that equally. A lot of times because they're unaware, they don't know about these strategies, about how to get your grade changed, is there a mistake or things like that. The other thing I noticed I'm a university professor, and I teach, all my kids they're from public school, private school, mainland, local, all of that. And what I notice is the local students who are public school educated are quite bright, as are the private school. I get them when they're seniors, so they've survived up until then. But the thing I really noticed is I think that public school students are less well-spoken. They don't have a lot of some of the refined skills in their writing necessarily, or in their ability to express themselves orally through oral argument. And a lot of the public school kids, I would say, are much more smooth talking, and they're much more comfortable speaking in front of the class and those kinds of things. But the good news is they can learn. Those are skills that are pretty easy to learn. And if you just draw them out, they will do it and they will excel. The other thing, on the flip side of that, this is not a scientific study, but just my personal feeling on this is public school students are incredibly resilient. So you can tell them, that was a good effort, but this sentence didn't make sense, this is bad, why did you do this, what were you thinking, you should go back and fix it. And they'll be like, okay. And then they'll go and do it and come back again. Sometimes when I've had kids that came from these elite private schools, they're like, what? Are you talking about my paper? They do not like that honest criticism, and they don't know how to deal with it. And they have a real problem with that. So I think so there's a flip side to it too, because in a public school, to survive, you have to learn how to navigate in a non-ideal situation. And that's a critical life skill for success.
And I think, the third part, it seems like they sort of answered that.
Yeah, I think it's been kind of going on. I guess the third part was just, are there any programs or what, I guess, commitments or proposals have been put forward to charter, public and private, to do a better job of bridging that? You guys kind of touched on it. Because scholarships, unfortunately, pull them out, and that doesn't actually put the resources back into that community. It actually takes that resource out of the community. So I don't know how scholarships always, there's a lot of research that shows that actually has a detrimental effect in some cases. But other than that, unless there's some other.
I do know specifically of one relatively new nonprofit. I don't know if anyone out there is involved in it. It's called Learning First, or Learning Matters. But they actually invited me, and they're going, it's a group of public school teachers, and they're actually going to Punahou next Monday, and they're going to take the teachers there to sort of observe what the teachers at Punahou are doing and how they're teaching their students. So that's one example. I think there are a lot of sort of piecemeal efforts out there, but I think it could definitely be more comprehensive.
Maybe I can chime in on that one as well, because one of the things that charter schools can contribute to a public education system more generally is because they have more leeway, they can do little petri dishes and try new things and get different results. I think we haven't done a great job here or in most places in the charter world of systematizing how, if there's insights gleaned in those schools, they're disseminated to the larger system. And that is something that really, could be very powerful. And then that's not to say that all the ideas are, it's in both directions. It's a cross-fertilization among the DOE schools, among the independent schools, and among the charter schools, because they all have different approaches and insights. And we haven't done a terrific job of, in the case of a charter school, a lot of them are just, trying to keep afloat and stay alive. So that to then say that part of our mission is to, UH Lab, obviously that's part of their mission, but other charter schools, maybe just by existing, they hope that, the word will get out and that sort of thing, but maybe we could find a way as a state to make those cross-fertilization opportunities more systematized for very busy educators.
Maybe that's a role that charter schools could really be a leader in. Next question.
Thank you. I have a comment and a question. My comment is to first of all thank Marguerite and everybody who's involved in parents in public schools, because I think that it's a really important function that hasn't been around for very long, and frequently our state agencies get frowned on for doing self-promotions, and I think having somebody speaking up for the quality of public schools in Hawaii is really important, so thank you for that. I am a parent, my daughter's in the audience. I went and participated in one of the school tours last year that Parents for Public Schools sponsored. And I thought that was a really excellent experience because I don't normally have the opportunity to get inside schools and see what's going on, hear from the students, hear from the faculty, and actually become aware of programs like the college preparatory curriculum, the extracurricular activities, the kinds of clubs and policies and things that go on inside the school. And I was favorably impressed with Stevenson Middle School, which is where I went. So I just wanted to make that comment and encourage other parents to do that, and also to ask, will those tours happen again this year? Because I was on the website just now and I didn't see them yet. So.
Yes, oh, thank you so much. Those are such kind words, and we're all volunteer, and so we really appreciate this. I hope that you can come and join us. But yes, they're definitely going on this year. Sue Elney is our coordinator, and we're working on that, and we're going to get those scheduled.
They're just not up on the website.
And is that where parents can go in the future to look?
We want to be able to get enough to actually list stuff, so as we get more responses back from the schools.
Yeah, so you can check ppshi.org.
And your daughter, is she at Stevenson now?
No, my daughter is at Noelani, but as a parent, I'm
That's
looking
where
far
you're-
into the future
Okay.
and evaluating options, and I think that's very typical of parents to be thinking quite a ways ahead. So, 6-7 years ahead of where my daughter is now is where I need to be planning.
And you live in Manoa?
Yes.
So would you have to get a GE for Stevenson, or would that be in New York?
No, I believe that's my district.
Yeah, so we were surprised when we started doing this, that it serves a lot of people to stay in their district. Because, parents are just concerned, nervous people. And so, but for some reason, they don't feel like they can just go and visit their school. So, so a lot of people, they say, thank you, that the tour was a great opportunity, but it's an important void, I think, that we fill, because to open up the schools and to invite everyone in to come and see, it's a great community building experience, I think. And parents feel like they can't go knocking on the door, and I don't know why that is. And a lot of schools too feel hyper criticized, like they've been under attack for so long that they feel very nervous about opening up. So I think it's a really mutually beneficial thing because we get to celebrate, and they have a lot of accomplishments. All these middle schools that we've seen all have exciting things going on there. So it's a great thing.
Thank you.
Glad to hear you enjoyed it.
I was just gonna mention that, one thing that, having been in the searching around parent role that I found, just sort of as a friendly criticism for the DOE, we were having this conversation before. When you're a school choice, like an independent school, charter school, and your survival is dependent on parents choosing to come to you, that would normally be their default choice. Things like having a really informative, appealing website matter. And I found as a parent here that was looking at DOE schools, frankly, I was kind of appalled at some of them and how hard it was to get any meaningful information about what kind of programs, what kind of, and frankly, it's not the fault of the schools. I mean, I think my sense is that the schools are kind of all on their own to do their own thing with their website without a lot of help. And some of them have fabulous websites, and some of them, you can't even find the principal's name. I mean, and that's important in this day and age if you're trying to make sure parents know what their full range of choices.
I've had that experience as well. So, but props to the DOE. The DOE's state website is actually pretty impressive. So, can't be too good. Okay.
Good statement, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I make a real quick comment? One of the things I think this happens too, when I worked for the DOE way back in the 90s, but even currently, a friend of mine who works at Oliver Magazine had said when they do their annual survey of public schools, that parents often say, well, the public school system's not very good, but our school's great.
Politicians.
Yeah. So it's sort of talking about the big it. It's not very good, but my school's great.
Hi, Christina.
Yeah, hi, I'm Christina. I'm actually a teacher at grade 12, so I'm gonna have your daughter next year in ninth grade as her English teacher. But before that, I actually taught at Green Dot, which is a school, CMO that you mentioned in LA when I was a teacher up there. And you brought up such an interesting point that I've been very lucky that I've worked at two fantastic charter schools that operate very well. We were part of a union, felt very safe at my school. But one thing I noticed, and you touched on this too as a parent, is that parents make a choice to enroll their kids in that charter school, even if it's free of tuition. And that parent involvement, in some ways, also is a form of class selection, right? Like for your parents both to know enough to enroll, to know how public education works, and then to enroll their student is in some ways also a denomination of understanding how the system works, understanding how to navigate that system. And you brought up such a great quote about education as the bedrock of democracy, and how in some ways, for our nation to succeed, all boats must rise, not just some, but all. So I guess my question is like, what do we do as a state, as a nation, to ensure that for those kids whose life's hard, man, and some kids, like their parents aren't always around to push them to be like, go talk to Miss Torres about your grade on Power School, because some schools don't even have Power School. Like, how do we help those kids too, knowing that it's gonna affect the kids that come to UH, the kids that your kids might hang out with at some point or might go to university with, and frankly, you know, as a nationwide organization with teaching and things like that, like I want to say like the name of our state, the fact that we're consistently ranked low is like, how do we help our entire statewide community all those rights too?
I think like more investment in parent and family education is really important. There's a lot of simple things, you know, in addition to checking on grades, you know, but just simple professional behavior, you know, like responding when, you know, someone asks you something, you always send a response, you know, those kinds of things. But anyway, help teaching. So I think what keeps a lot of, when you're at a public school, I think the pervasive feeling is that you can't say anything about it or you can't do anything about it. You just have to take what's offered. I know that sometimes parents feel actually afraid that if they criticize a teacher or a principal, that their child is going to somehow, you know, get the impact of that act. So making everyone feel safe, that we can have an open environment where honest exchange can occur, encouraging the school community to be welcoming of those kinds of inputs and not feel so defensive. I mean, that's kind of a big problem, and I don't really know how to effectively deal with that. But that would really do a lot to actually, I think, raise everybody up. But yeah, and so I think we need to invest in family education so that, you know, how do you help your child succeed? I mean, even things like, okay, you're a low-income person, but your kid can go to college too. You know, a lot of people don't know that. So there's a lot of things, if we invest in these educational programs for the families as to how they can improve the situation for their children, would really reap huge payoffs.
I guess I would maybe just add that, you know, for those engaged in communities and trying to you know, help the full range of our population and help disadvantaged communities, I think the schools are carrying such huge weight now that to say the school's job also is to educate the parents how to navigate this. I think other social services agencies, other community organizations that are trying to help our population becoming educated in the education system, how to navigate that education system and share that with parents could be a very powerful thing. You know, one example we were chatting about before the thing started, I mean, when I first moved here, it was 2 weeks before the school year started. And, you know, I knew that there were geographic exceptions, but I found that there was no website I could go to see which schools had openings, who were still accepting geographic exceptions for which grades. I had to drive school by school. And I thought, well, lucky thing, I don't have a job yet. This is my full-time job right now. A lot of parents don't have that luxury to go around in the middle of the workday to visit 7 schools and find out who's got openings. And, there's some basic things that we could do as a system to make it easier, but even if you do it, if parents don't have the knowledge about how to take advantage of that, then it's still gonna be the parents who are sophisticated enough to go online and look at stuff, and just it's the same self-selection happens with the school of choice. So, but that I think is maybe something for the larger community to talk about, than to say that is another thing to add to the schools to do.
Great question. Okay, last one. Come on up.
I'm not a very good speaker, so I have no idea if it's gonna come out right. The curriculum for the Department of Education, is that common, is it the same throughout the state? And then my second question is, it seems that a lot of parents are looking for a change, and that's why they seek places like charter schools. So why can't, or what is preventing the DOE and the charter schools and private schools from getting together and recreating a new, or making a new curriculum so that they can share in the same kind of teaching as private schools?
So, I happen to not like Common Core, but I'll,
For another day.
but, I think one of the reasons charter schools existed, and the New Century Public Charter Schools, the act that it enables them, it's basically, the charter schools are supposed to be this explorational group of schools that are trying to find new ways and new curricula and new ideas for the public education system. And ideally, those charter schools become accredited and they become public schools with their curriculum and the like. So it's, with 34 charter schools, you'd hope that eventually their ideas will filtrate into our public school system. And one of the things that America's famous for, we have the most Nobel Prizes and everybody wants to come to school here because it's so innovative and we're constantly, inventing new things. We have such differences among us and allow that to express itself. I think it's a huge danger that whether it's No Child Left Behind or Common Core, if we try to educate every single student exactly the same way, because then we're going to be like China or Russia or someplace that basically everybody knows exactly the same thing, and so when a problem comes up, there's only one response. Instead of now, we get 100,000 responses, most of them are wrong, but some of them turn out to be true. So I think that the vanguard of the future of public education should be the charter school program and not Common Core.
I guess I'm not sure that it's always the case that it's so much curriculum that parents are focusing on. I mean, I think that there are some parents who look at that very carefully, and if you have a charter school that has a very specific sort of approach to education, they'll be looking at that. But I think a lot of parents are looking at the other things. How's the facility look? What are the opportunities for the kids? My child's going to go to school and those kinds of things. So I guess I agree with the premise that curricular innovation is really important. I'm not sure that Common Core necessarily gets in the way of that. I think that there are some really good things that Common Core brings to kind of equalize the playing field. Charter schools do have to be looking at Common Core. Now, how they deliver those standards is much more within their discretion, but it's attempting to address kind of gaps where we don't have some sort of expectation of learning at certain levels. You can get very uneven outcomes and make big gaps. But I guess overall, having the innovation to find different ways to get there is really important for us.
Okay, Michael. Do you want to answer?
Yeah, I guess having tried to look at curricular standards, they're really vague, no matter what system you look at. So I think like, you might think that, oh my gosh, you know, why can't we standardize the curriculum? But I don't think that that's actually what really strongly influences the experience of the child. What matters to the child is how good your teacher is. You know, how much energy and enthusiasm and effort that they put in and how they can draw out the students. And so I think, you know, because the curriculum just has this broad kind of stroke of benchmarks and targets and things, but what actually happens is really up to the teacher. So I think where we can help teachers is by providing them support, making sure that they have some time so they can think about what they're going to do in the classroom. They have time to actually collaborate and learn from each other to find out what works. Because like learning best practices from people who are more experienced than you, that's really important, and that really helps people advance. But if you're just thrown in the classroom with no support and class after class with no breaks, you know, the outcome is not going to be very good.
Right. Gina says you're a homeboy, so I should let you go. I'll have to make it snappy though.
Awesome, thank you so much. And my question is, you know, dating back in 1892, high school was established by this so-called Committee of 10, if you will, to extend the education of our American youth from 8 years to 12 years, with the main focus of continuing a balanced covering of all the subjects and rejecting suggestions that high school should divide students into those that would graduate and go on to become college-bound, and those that would go directly into different, I guess, various work trade groups. My question is, do you believe that this is a thought that should be revisited with our ever-changing society? And if so, how would we implement it? Or if not, what else do you see in this ideology? Thank you. Oh, sorry.
I don't know if that's gonna be snappy.
So are you asking whether we should revisit whether or not everyone should go to college? Is that what you're asking?
No, it was in 1892, whenever high school was first established. There were suggestions saying that we shouldn't cover every subject as we do right now equally. We should divide the students into two groups: those that are bound to go on to college, and those that are going to graduate and go directly into the workforce. Because as you can see in society today, not everybody's fit for college. I don't think I'm fit for college, but I'm here struggling.
Well, the Department of Education's own statements are making our graduates career and college ready, so that they have a choice to do one or the other. And I know a lot of plumbers that make a lot more money than I do, so it's a good. The system that you mentioned is what's happened in Germany today. I've studied there quite a while. I mean, they have a vocational track and they have an academic track, and they kick people into one or the other of them about middle school. So, and then there's, very difficult to make the transition. Maybe you start out thinking, I really want to be a carpenter, but then you get pretty high up in the system, and then all of a sudden you think, well, maybe I want to be an engineer or something. So I don't know that it seems to work for Germany, but I think trying to keep people with their options open as long as possible is probably a better strategy.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I don't believe that everyone should go to college necessarily, even though I'm a college educator. But I think people have to find out what is best for them. But at the same time, like, I didn't decide what career I wanted to follow until actually after I got my master's degree. It took me that long to figure out what the heck I wanted to do. So I think the idea of tracking people at 6th grade is frightening to me, because kids don't know. I mean, even high school or college graduates still don't know what they want to do with their lives. So yeah, they need to be prepared, not have their opportunities limited, but be able to go and be successful whatever they choose.
I guess another way of saying kind of the same thing that Phil Marguerite just said. Maybe the challenge isn't so much whether there should be on a track to college or a track to a very life-supporting post-secondary outcome. It's not college. The point is we cannot have schools that have kids on tracks to nowhere. And we have that still. And then that is something that, you know, whether it's, you know, there's a lot of criticism of we're focusing so much on college that we're neglecting, you know, high-skilled trades. And that may all be true, but I think the point is I'm okay with having a bias toward looking at the sort of college admission as an important thing, because it's easier to sort of be preparing kids for that option and then they choose a different option than it is to not be preparing for the kids that option and then it's foreclosed. And that gives me more excitement.
That's great.
One last word.
Sorry. Yeah, and I think the distinction is getting a little blurred anyway. I mean, there's so much technology in all of our trades. So, I mean, I don't know how you would so cleanly separate these things anyway. And you know, people have lots of different parts of their brain. And so I think it would be great if every kid was able to refine their skills, hand-eye coordination, artistic, you know, academic, all of it.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. Again, we have another Civil Cafe next week focusing on education. This one is on school empowerment, which we touched on a bit this conversation. And to continue the conversation, feel free to join that Civil Beat Facebook group. It's pretty cool. You can ask questions there. Also a plug for Civil Beat. If any of you are educators or involved in education, we do have a Civil Beat subscription discount rate. So it's cut in half because we know we gotta make it accessible for everyone. All right, well, take care everyone, have a good night.
You're right across the street from me, so.